So maybe you've heard that processed meats, aka deli meats, cause cancer. And that might certainly be true. But I find that there is one crucial variable that is always left out of the processed meats causing cancer conversation, and that is the fact that most of the time when people consume processed meats, they're also consuming bread.
So even when it comes to processed meat, some people still like to shift the blame to bread or other high-carb foods. Well, some of the studies that the IARC reviewed prior to categorizing processed meat as a Class 1 carcinogen did adjust for grain intake. And they even mentioned excluding studies that looked at Western dietary patterns because they understand that processed meat consumption often comes packaged with refined grains and added sugar.
Great video by Dr. Matthew Nagra. I highly recommend you to keep watching his video because he's giving out good quality information as usual. He's one of the best science communicators that I know. I wanted to expand upon a very interesting topic. What's the science behind red meat causing cancer? Most of you probably know that the IARC classified processed meat as group 1 carcinogen and unprocessed red meat as 2A carcinogen. So what's the logic behind this classification? Today we will take a closer look at human studies that might indicate why unprocessed red meat can cause cancer. Now the chemicals in questions are nitrates, nitrites, and heme iron. Let's start with nitrates or nitrites. This is quite interesting because nitrates are usually commonly found in a lot of vegetables, whereas nitrites is usually found in processed meats. Nitrites are usually added to processed meat in order to prevent botulism. And there's two different paths that nitrites or nitrates can be metabolized. The good path is when you consume nitrites, for example from beets, and they get transformed in the mouth through bacteria to nitrites. Nitrite is further being converted into nitric oxide, and nitric oxide has been associated with a lot of great health benefits. One of those is blood pressure control. The bad path is when you consume nitrites, especially from processed meats, and those get converted into N-nitroso compounds. And these specific N-nitroso compounds are carcinogenic, meaning they can cause cancer, especially in large amounts. However, some of you astute viewers probably noticed something, and that is that nitrites are usually not added into unprocessed red meat. So what is the connection between cancer and unprocessed red meat? And that is where the other compound or mineral in question comes into play, and that is heme iron. Let's look at human studies to see how heme iron can potentially cause cancer. The first study that we will be looking at is a study that was released in 1996. In this study, 6 male volunteers aged 24 to 32 followed a specific diet for 9 weeks while staying in a metabolic ward. A metabolic ward is basically like a prison, if you so will. Those volunteers stayed in that metabolic ward for 9 whole weeks, meaning everything they did was controlled, from the diet to everything they drank and you name it. The volunteers were divided into 3 groups: a low red meat diet, a diet high in red meat, and a diet high in red meat with additional bran. However, let's leave out the latter because the bran didn't do anything. So let's focus solely on low red meat diets and high red meat diets. Both diets were isocaloric, meaning they had the same amount of calories and were carefully controlled for nitrite intake. The researchers even went as far as controlling nitrates in the water the participants were drinking. Yes, they had everything under control. Let's have a look at the results. With nitrites being controlled, the high red meat diet had a significant increase in N-nitroso compounds, as you can see here illustrated by this graph. And this is not the only study that found similar findings. The following study that I will be sharing had exactly the same rigor of control, methods, and design, except that this study was a crossover design, meaning all participants had to consume all the diets that were present in this study, and the participants were aged 25 to 74. They also had 2 diet protocols. Protocol number 1 tested 3 diets. They tested a diet low in red meat around 60 grams, a diet high in red meat of around 420 grams of red meat, and a vegetarian diet that had the same amount of proteins. What were the results? What we can see in these results is pretty similar to the previous study. A high red meat diet created more carcinogenic N-nitroso compounds. And in the second protocol, the researchers wanted to test the effect heme iron has on N-nitroso compound creation. They gave participants either heme iron or inorganic iron. What were the results? In contrast to the inorganic iron supplements, heme iron increased the N-nitroso compounds formation significantly as well. And the last study that we will be looking at had the same rigor in design, methods, and you name it. I won't bore you with the details again. They also compared the vegetarian to a high red meat diet, which consisted of 420 grams of red meat per day. And to no surprise here, the high red meat diet induced a higher creation in N-nitroso compounds. And this is all the evidence I've came across of unprocessed red meat causing cancer. What is really interesting about about this finding is that the dose seems to make the poison here. There was no effect seen in N-nitroso compound creation when participants consumed around 60 grams of unprocessed red meat per day. But high red meat diets, on the other hand, well, that's a totally different picture. High red meat diets have shown that they can indeed contribute to a great amount of N-nitroso compound creation. And this is probably why unprocessed red meat is classified as a 2A carcinogen. What are your thoughts about this topic? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you during my next video.